In a remote countryside of Maine, an old wooden house stood isolated from the rest of the town. Its owner, Eleanor Parker, was a lonely widow who had been living alone for nearly 30 years. At over 80 years old, Mrs. Parker had no one left. Her husband died in a car accident in the 90s, and her only son passed away from illness at the age of 30. With no relatives, no friends, and no visitors, her only companion was her aging cat, Misty, who had been with her for over 15 years. The town itself was peaceful, but strange rumors surrounded Mrs. Parker's house. Some locals claimed that whenever they passed by her home at night, they always felt an unseen presence watching them. Others swore they had seen a shadowy figure behind the window when the sun went down. But everyone knew Mrs. Parker lived alone. The first night, the sound in the dark. On a freezing winter night, when snow blanketed the rooftops and roads, Mrs. Parker sat by the window, quietly knitting. The dim glow of an old oil lamp flickered, casting eerie shadows on the wooden floor. Misty curled up on the chair, ears twitching now and then, as if listening to something unseen. Mrs. Parker sighed. Another lonely night. Then, a strange sound broke the silence. Tap, tap, tap. It sounded like footsteps, but not from inside the house. It came from outside the window. Misty shot up, fur bristling. The cat stared at the window and let out a low growl. A chill ran down Mrs. Parker's spine. Slowly, she turned her head toward the glass. Outside, in the dim glow of the street lamp, she saw it. A figure. Tall and thin, standing completely still. Its face was ghastly pale, with hollow, sunken eyes. But in the blink of an eye, it disappeared. Mrs. Parker froze. Had she imagined it? Was it just a trick of the light? She stood up, hesitating before pulling the curtains shut. But just as her hand touched the fabric, thud! Something slammed against the window. She stumbled back, heart pounding. Misty leaped off the chair and bolted under the table. Outside, nothing. Swallowing hard, Mrs. Parker decided to lock the window and head to bed. But all night, she couldn't sleep. In the corner of the room, Misty was still trembling. It had seen something, too. The sun had just disappeared behind the distant trees, giving way to a creeping darkness that swallowed the town whole. The air was unsettlingly still. Sitting in her usual armchair, Mrs. Parker tapped her fingers against the wooden armrest, staring blankly into the dimly lit room. She hadn't slept last night. The shadowy figure outside her window lingered in her thoughts, no matter how hard she tried to dismiss it as a trick of the light. But the way Misty had reacted, it couldn't have been just a coincidence. The temperature dropped. She wrapped her shawl tighter around her shoulders and stood up, heading to lock the door when... click. The door shuddered slightly. It was a faint noise, but enough to make her stop in her tracks. Her eyes fixed on the wooden door. It was still shut. The latch was in place. No one could have opened it from the outside. Click, click. This time, the sound was louder. Like someone was turning the handle. Her heart pounded. Her breathing became shallow. It wasn't possible. No one ever came here, especially at this hour. Slowly, she reached for the cane beside her chair, gripping it tightly. Maybe it was just the wind, right? But the moment she touched the latch... bang! The door shook violently from the outside. Mrs. Parker let out a gasp, stumbling backward. The door was still locked. But something had just tried to get in. There was no mistaking it. Someone, or something, was out there. Misty let out a low growl, retreating into the corner, eyes locked on the door. Mrs. Parker tried to steady her breathing. But before she could react further, another sound echoed through the house. Knock, knock, knock. Someone was knocking. She held her breath. The way it sounded, it wasn't normal. Slowly, she edged toward the door, peeking through the small gap. But outside, there was no one. Her hands trembled as she locked the door again and backed away, reaching for her phone. But just as she turned around, knock, knock, knock. This time, the knocking came from the window. The wind howled through the cracks in the window, carrying an eerie, hollow sound. Mrs. Parker sat frozen in her worn-out armchair, her frail hands gripping the fabric. The knocking still echoed in her mind. No one had been outside. But if no one was there, then who knocked? Misty curled up under the table, her round eyes glistening with fear. She had never seen her dog react this way before. Dogs don't bark at nothing. Knock, knock, knock. Again. But this time, from the back door. Mrs. Parker gasped, nearly dropping the small lamp beside her. Her hands trembled as she reached for her cane, trying to steady herself. There had to be someone, right? She moved slowly toward the back door, careful not to make a sound. Her heart pounded wildly in her chest. Holding her breath, she peeked through the small window. A figure stood in her backyard. A tall man, dressed in a black coat, stood completely still in the middle of the yard. His face was obscured by the shadows. Mrs. Parker felt a shiver crawl down her spine. No, that wasn't possible. How had he gotten into her yard? She was about to step away when, without warning, the man lifted his head. Mrs. Parker froze. He had no eyes. Two empty sockets, deep and dark, staring straight at her. And then, he smiled. Bang! The back door shook violently. Misty barked furiously. Mrs. Parker screamed, rushing to the living room, locking all the windows. But before she could even catch her breath. Knock, knock, knock. He was at the front door now. She stumbled backward, shaking, when a voice whispered in her ear. Open the door. I know you're in there. Mrs. Parker couldn't sleep. Ever since that night, when someone had knocked on her door, she had felt a presence watching her. She had checked all the doors. They were locked. But every night, when she turned off the lights and climbed into bed, she heard strange noises. Faint, whispering voices in the dark. Soft footsteps gliding across the hallway. A cold chill crawling up her spine. And every time she turned around, she saw her own reflection in the mirror, but something was off. Tonight, she decided to check. Holding a flashlight, she stepped towards the large mirror in the living room. She took a deep breath and shone the light on the glass surface. The mirror reflected the dimly lit room behind her. But, something moved. Someone was standing in the mirror. Mrs. Parker gasped and stumbled back. No. That wasn't possible. She forced herself to look again. The shadow was still there. A thin woman, wearing a white dress, her long hair covering half of her face. Mrs. Parker froze. The woman in the mirror was not her. She swallowed hard and lifted her hand. The figure in the mirror lifted its hand too. But when Mrs. Parker lowered her hand, the figure kept its hand up. She screamed, tripping backward, hitting the cold floor hard. And in that instant, the figure lunged forward in the mirror. Mrs. Parker was no longer herself after that night. The figure in the mirror had disappeared when she turned on all the lights, but the uneasy feeling remained. Every time she walked past the mirror, she felt like someone was watching her. But that wasn't the end. Tonight, at exactly 2 a.m., her old landline rang. The sharp ring echoed through the quiet house, making her jump. Who would be calling at this hour? Her hands trembled as she picked up the phone. Hello. Silence. No one responded. She slowly placed the phone down. But the moment she let go, the phone rang again. This time, the air in the room felt colder. She swallowed and lifted the receiver once more. Hello. This time, she heard it. Soft breathing. Slow, steady, eerie. Do you remember me? Mrs. Parker froze. The voice was familiar. It was her husband. But he had been dead for 10 years. Bang! A kitchen cabinet slammed open, making her drop the phone in shock. The phone lay on the floor, still on. But now, all she could hear was static and the slow, chilling breath. She crouched down, reaching for the phone. But before she could touch it, a whisper crawled through the receiver. I'm standing right behind you. A wave of ice-cold fear swept through her body. She turned around and saw a figure standing in the dark corner of the room. Mrs. Parker didn't remember when she ran to her bed. All she knew was, after seeing the shadow in the corner, she had bolted from the living room, slammed the door shut, and dashed upstairs. Her heart pounded like a drum. Then she realized something. She was alone in the house. How could she escape if that thing was still downstairs? Her hands trembled as she pulled the blanket over her head. Then she heard it. Footsteps. Thump, thump. Slow. Deliberate. Each step pressing into the old wooden floor. She held her breath. The steps came closer. She didn't dare move. Then, silence. Everything became too quiet. She lifted the edge of the blanket, just a little, and peeked at the bedroom door. Nothing. Maybe she had imagined everything. But then. Knock, knock. The sound came from the window. That's when she realized. Her bedroom was on the second floor. Who could knock on the window at this height? She didn't want to turn around. But instinctively, she glanced at the window. Outside, it was pitch black, but something was staring at her. A pale white face. No mouth. No nose. Only two hollow, black eyes. She sat up abruptly, ready to scream. But the face didn't move. It just pressed against the glass, completely still. And it was smiling. Mrs. Parker couldn't scream. The sound was trapped in her throat. She stared at the pale white face outside her window. It had no mouth. But she knew. It was smiling. Then, as if it could read her thoughts, the head tilted slightly. The hollow black eyes never blinked. They stayed locked onto her. Her entire body froze. But, something was wrong. Her bedroom window had no balcony. No ledge. Nothing to stand on. So how was that face there? She shot up from the bed, stumbling backward, heart pounding. But when she blinked, the face was gone. Only darkness remained outside the window. She collapsed onto the bed, trying to steady her breath. Maybe she imagined it. Maybe it was just a shadow. Maybe it was nothing. But then, from downstairs, she heard a door creak open. Creak. She froze. Her front door had been locked. No one else had the key. She wasn't alone. Someone was inside the house. And then, she heard footsteps on the stairs. Thump, thump. Thump, thump. Slow. One step at a time. Coming up. Mrs. Parker barely dared to breathe. The footsteps on the stairs grew closer. Thump, thump. Thump, thump. A part of her wanted to run. But her legs wouldn't move. Someone was coming up. She tried to calm herself down. Maybe it was her imagination. Maybe it was just the house settling. But, she knew better. A cold chill ran down her spine. She scanned the room, searching for something, anything, to defend herself. And then, the footsteps stopped. Right outside her bedroom door. She gripped the blanket, heart pounding. No knocking. No voice. Just silence. She held her breath. And then the door slowly creaked open. It wasn't locked. It groaned as it inched open, little by little. The hinges whined softly in the darkness. Mrs. Parker didn't dare move. Her dim nightlight cast a faint glow into the empty hallway. No one was there. But Mrs. Parker felt it. Someone was standing there. Even if she couldn't see them. The air in the room turned icy cold. Her breath became a mist in the air. As if something unseen had entered. And then, suddenly, the door slammed shut. Bang! She jumped. And right at that moment, she heard a whisper. Right next to her ear. "You're sleeping in my room. Did you see him?" That question echoed in Mr. Williams' head as he sat in his worn-out armchair, staring at the living room window. Tonight, the wind howled outside. His old wooden house creaked with every gust. He shivered, pulling a blanket over his legs. Just my imagination, just an old man's mind playing tricks. But his eyes never left the window. Because earlier today, his young nurse had asked him a question that made his blood run cold. "Did you see him?" She had frozen at the window, her eyes locked on something outside, something terrifying. When he turned to look, there was nothing. Just the empty yard. Mr. William felt uneasy. His nurse bit her lip, her face pale. "I thought I saw a man, standing there, staring in." Her voice shook. He had laughed it off, telling her she must have imagined it. But tonight, as he sat alone in his empty house, he saw him. A shadow stood just outside the window. Featureless. Shapeless. But he knew it was watching him. And then it knocked on the glass. Tap, tap, tap. Mr. William froze. The figure didn't move. It just stood there. And kept knocking. Tap, tap, tap. A cold dread crawled up his spine. He tried to scream, but his voice caught in his throat. And then it opened its mouth. But no sound came out. Only darkness. A gaping, black void. And then it lifted a hand, and pointed straight at him. Tap, tap, tap. The knocking didn't stop. And at that moment, Mr. William understood. It wasn't human. It had come to collect something. Mrs. Edith had lived in this nursing home for over 3 years. It was quiet and gloomy, but at least she had a small room, a warm bed, and regular meals. But lately, she couldn't sleep. Every night, when the hallway was empty, she heard footsteps. Click, clack, click, clack. The footsteps were neither fast nor slow. But they always stopped right outside her door. And then someone whispered, "Open the door." The voice was neither male nor female. Soft. Persistent. She held her breath. She knew something was standing outside. But the security cameras never captured anything. During the day, she asked the nurses. No one walked around at night. No one visited her room. So, who was calling her? Tonight, Mrs. Edith decided to open the door. Click, clack, click, clack. The footsteps returned. Then they stopped at her door. Open the door. Her heart pounded. Her hands trembled. The doorknob was ice cold. She took a deep breath, and opened the door. No one was there. Just the long, dark hallway. But when she turned back around, a shadow stood inside her room. It was tall, thin, featureless. And it was waiting for her. The shadow stood there. Motionless. Breathless. Yet it was watching her. Even though it had no eyes. Mrs. Edith couldn't scream. She couldn't run. She just stood there, staring at the tall, skeletal figure in her room. Then, it moved forward. Thud, thud. Each step was heavy, as if the ground itself strained under its presence. She backed away, her heart hammering. "You see me now?" The voice whispered in her mind. It didn't come from its mouth. It came from everywhere. "You see me now?" She shook her head, tried to scream. But no sound came out. Her throat was locked in terror. The next morning, Mrs. Edith didn't wake up. When the nurse opened the door, she was still in bed, her eyes wide open, mouth frozen in an unfinished scream. But the scariest part. On the floor were two charred footprints, as if someone had been standing there all night. 3 days later, another elderly woman disappeared. Mrs. Edith wasn't the only one who had seen the shadow. That night, Mrs. Margaret heard knocking. Knock. 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 Slow. Patient. She sat up, her eyes heavy with sleep. She glanced at the clock, 2:47 a.m. Who would be knocking at this hour? Knock. 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 This time, closer. She swallowed hard. Her room was at the end of the hallway. No one else lived near her. "Nurse," she called out, her voice trembling. No answer. Knock. 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 Right outside the door. Her palms turned ice cold, her heart pounding so violently she feared it would burst from her chest. She stood up, inching toward the door. Click. She turned the doorknob. Darkness rushed in. A tall, skeletal figure stood there, faceless, eyeless, nothing but a gaping void. And then, it opened its mouth. No teeth. No tongue. Only an endless abyss. Mrs. Margaret couldn't scream. The mouth widened, as if to consume her whole. Then, it whispered. "You hear me now?" The whisper crawled into her ears like an echo from the abyss. Then, the darkness swallowed everything. The next morning, Mrs. Margaret was gone. The room was empty. Only a single blackened handprint remained on the door. Just like the one in Mrs. Edith's room. 3 elderly residents had vanished. The others began whispering among themselves. They spoke of a shadow lurking at night. They spoke of knocking on doors that no one dared to open. They spoke of whispers in their ears. That no one could escape. The nursing home was drowning in fear. Mrs. Edith. Mr. Howard. Mrs. Margaret. 3 people vanished. But the most terrifying thing was how they disappeared. No trace. No sound. No explanation. Only the blackened handprints. Mrs. Olivia, 85 years old, curled up on her bed. She hadn't slept in 2 days. Because she saw them. The shadows in the hallway. They had no faces. They had no eyes. But she knew, they were watching her. They were waiting. Waiting for her to open the door. 2:33 a.m. A sound echoed from the end of the hall. Click. Click. Mrs. Olivia held her breath. Wheels rolling. Not the nurses. Mrs. Margaret's room. Her eyes widened. That room, the lights were on. But no one was supposed to be there. And yet. The door slowly creaked open. Inside, a figure stood. Tall. Thin. Wearing a worn-out dress. Mrs. Margaret. But, it couldn't be. She was gone. Mrs. Olivia trembled. Mrs. Margaret looked up. Her face. No eyes. No nose. No mouth. Just a blank sheet of skin. But still, Mrs. Olivia heard her. Inside her mind. We can't escape. They are always watching. Mrs. Olivia screamed, stepping back. And then, she saw something even worse. Mrs. Margaret wasn't alone. They were standing there. Dozens of figures. Eyes white as marble. Mouths open, but no sound came out. Just staring at her. And then, they started moving toward her. Darkness swallowed everything. The next morning, Mrs. Olivia was gone. Her room was empty. On the window, a message was carved with fingernails. They are watching us. Mr. Carter was the last one left in room 217. He had seen everything. Mrs. Edith vanished. Mr. Howard vanished. Mrs. Margaret vanished. And now, Mrs. Olivia. His old friends were being erased from existence. As if they had never been here. But Carter remembered. He remembered their faces. Their voices. Their trembling hands. They were here. But now, no one remembered them. 3:10 a.m. The room was deathly silent. Mr. Carter refused to sleep. Because he knew. If he slept, he would never wake up again. The shadows hovered outside his window. They were whispering. Carter. Carter. It's your turn. In the corner of the room, there was a painting. A painting of everyone in the nursing home. Mrs. Edith sitting in her chair. Mr. Howard playing chess. Mrs. Margaret watering plants. Mrs. Olivia reading a book. But now, the painting was empty. Everyone was gone. Except for one empty chair. The chair meant for Mr. Carter. Mr. Carter trembled as he stood up. No. He couldn't just disappear like this. He ran to the door, trying to escape. But the door wouldn't open. His face turned pale. Since when did the room have no door handle? He turned back to the painting. And he saw himself inside it. Sitting in the empty chair. With hollow eyes. The next morning. Room 217 was completely empty. No trace of Mr. Carter. The painting on the wall was now complete. Inside, they were all there. But none of them had faces. They didn't disappear. They are still here. But no one can see them anymore. The Forgotten Souls. March 10, 2023. Hollow Pines Nursing Home launched an internal investigation. Something was very wrong here. In the past 5 months, 17 elderly residents had vanished. No traces. No clues. As if they had never existed. No one remembered them. But then, a janitor named Daniel Cooper found something that shouldn't exist. In the basement. A room not listed on the blueprints of the nursing home. An old wooden door, covered in dust. Daniel felt a chill crawl down his spine as he touched the doorknob. Inside, it was pitch black. But on the wall, there was a massive painting. A painting of the missing residents. Mr. Howard. Mrs. Margaret. Mrs. Olivia. Mr. Carter. They were all there. But their faces were empty. No eyes. No nose. No mouth. Just hollow black voids. Daniel staggered back. The room wasn't empty. In the center, there were 17 beds. On each bed, a motionless body lay still. Pale skin. No breathing. No movement. But they were not dead. Daniel panicked and ran out. He reported to the management. But when they returned to the basement, the room was gone. The wall was completely blank. No door. No painting. No beds. March 11, 2023. Daniel vanished. No one remembered him. Not a single person. not even his co-workers. And on the director's office wall, a new painting appeared. A painting with 18 people,